Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm covering Homeworld Fleet Command by Modifius Entertainment. And Gearbox Entertainment, now that I think about it, both of those entertainments over there. And Homeworld Fleet Command is a 2 to 4 player game, primarily a team-based game, head-to-head, 2 players ideally, but you could play it with multiple players as well, in which you'll be controlling a variety of various fleets in the game as you try to wander around the galaxy, pick the specific mission, and or create your own as you go through it, trying to accomplish your goals, and make sure you get what you need done before the other players. And every single mission is going to have different ways you can achieve different medals, and or when the time runs out, whoever has the most medals wins. The general idea is it's a fleet skirmish game in space. You have your various sides, you have your various objectives, and you're trying to accomplish yours before your opponent accomplishes theirs. It's worth noting this is a prototype, all rules, components, all that stuff subject to change, and I'll have a link to the Kickstarter down below. From there, the general idea of the game, like I mentioned, is a head-to-head skirmish game which you have 2 different factions. We have the Taiiidan, we have the Kushan over here. Both of those are going to have their own specific ability in play. You have your various forces with their own unique models, their own unique ships, or sometimes they have ships that are similar to one another in the game, and you'll be controlling specific fleets in the game over here. On your turn, you'll be drawing up cards equal to a few different things. You'll be looking at your various commanders in play, as well as your fleet card over here, adding up your full hand size. In this case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we also have our play ability, which is 1, 2, 3. So we can currently, over here on the Taiiidan over here, can be drawing 4 cards and be playing 3 of those cards. Depending on the scenario you pick, depending on what you do in the game, you'll be drawing larger hands or fewer hands, depending on just how much stuff is going on as you try to manage your various fleets. But you're going to go ahead into this deck over here, you'll draw your cards, you'll have both sides drawing their cards, whatever commanders they have in play, whatever abilities they have in play, and then from there you'll be going ahead and trying to determine first player, where players can choose to, before rolling, they can choose to discard a certain number of cards to add to their roll, at which point each side will go ahead and roll for their side, in which the higher number, modified by the cards you discarded, will determine who goes first. In this case we have blue over here going first. You're going to have, in that case, you're going to make sure to give this token to the other player. That's going to be effectively a reroll that the other player, the player not going first, gets first, and then if they use it they can pass to the opposing side. If they don't use it, they don't ever need to pass it. And then from there, players will take turns playing cards back and forth. These cards basically determine your actions, although you always have the flexibility to use basic actions. So if you find yourself without an attack, don't worry, every single card can be used as an attack in the game. It just might not be the cooler move and attack, or the attack plus. So you always have access to all the basic actions by just playing a card face down. Alternatively, you go ahead and you're going to use these cards to activate your turn, and these cards come in, well, whatever the abilities are, which we'll get to shortly, as well as interrupt abilities. Interrupt abilities, that some of them can be played on your turn, some of them can be played on the opponent's turn, but they're ways to have a little bit of surprise and throwing a little bit of chaos into the mix as you move around the board, do what you need, but then as your opponent's closing in on them, you play an interrupt attack and go ahead and shoot as they strafe by you. So from there you go ahead and start playing cards. You're going to choose a card to play. And this card is going to activate 2 units over here. One unit's going to move and attack. The other unit's going to activate their extra ability to move, which some cards have, some don't. The afterburners, and then move and attack. You'll have these specific units on the board, and as you activate them, you're going to go ahead and flip over their things. Each unit can only be activated once per turn, so you're going to go ahead and use those units. You'll go ahead, you'll move, you'll look at their unit cards in play, and you'll start making attacks based on those unit cards. Every card is going to have a ton of information on it that you have to go through over here, so let's just go ahead and show you one over here. You'll have this card in particular is going to be rolling 5 dice on an attack. It has 0 defense, it moves 3, it has a ramming ability of 1. The 3 points over here, that's going to be effectively the unit value, which is relevant for certain scenarios and objectives. Over here is the weapon it uses when it attacks, which this one's going to be rolling 1 plus over here per fighter. 1 die is rolled per fighter. You can see over here we have a unit of 6 over here, and so it's going to be rolling 6 dice because right now it's at full strength, although as they take damage they'll roll fewer. It attacks at range 1 with a close encounters attack, so that's currently a range 1, and then there's some ability modifiers for, you know, various things like evasive, where it can reroll enemy successes against it, afterburners, where it has some extra movement, and some basic abilities over here. But this is what it hits on. It hits on a 5+, so you're effectively rolling 6 dice on a 5+, with a variety of abilities in play. That's how you read one of these cards, and there's a lot of cards with a lot of abilities you'll have to go through as far as what's going on as you build out your fleets, as you try to take advantage, as you wander into asteroid fields to avoid damage, as you start using your turrets or your focused fire, or you start to harvest resources in the game. There's a ton of things happening as far as what you do, and the game delivers it to you slowly, scenario by scenario, giving you the core rules. Again, the core rule structure is you're going to have the specific information you have in front of you, you'll be drawing cards, you'll have a certain number of cards you can play each turn, you'll play those cards to move around the battlefield, to attack, to basically set yourself up for the success you need based on the specific scenario constraints. It's worth noting, everything you see over here kind of just made up. As far as this over here, this is not an actual scenario, cards are not the actual cards over here, this is all just set up for the sake of us showing you how to play. But past that, the basic idea is it's a skirmish game where you take actions back and forth until either you accomplish accomplish, your objectives and win the game, or alternatively until time runs out and you see who has the most points and they accomplish their objectives that way and win the game. The game is going to take you through a bunch of scenarios bit by bit, introducing new rules, new aspects. Like I said already, you're going to have the harvesting, you're going to have, you're going to have various cards in play, you're going to have tons of abilities that are slowly introduced into the game. You're going to have various scenario effects, different things that modify the game state. You're going to have boarding, dock chips. There's a ton of stuff that's being added that will constantly enhance what's happening here as far as the strategic depth that is happening on the table. And that's basically Homeworld Fleet Command. Effectively a 2 to 4 player head-to-head skirmish game with a bunch of scenarios, with an iterative amount of rules and strategic options being handed to you one step at a time as you go through this, which brings us to the review, starting off with ease of play. This overall, the rules are, well, we'll have caveats in it. I will have pros and cons to talk about, but overall, the rulebook itself has all the scenarios in it. If you see the rulebook, don't be too overwhelmed by it. It has all the information nicely laid out. It goes through the turn structure, which all of that is very simple. The abilities are all very simple, and then it kind of spoon feeds it to you by giving you scenario 1, which kind of just has the bare minimum of what you need, but then you dive from there into scenario 2, which adds a whole bunch of new aspects, close encounters, how to deal with defensive fire, the shooting back and all these things. It's going to go to scenario 3 and start dealing with turrets and harvesting and all those things. Scenario 4 is going to start adding, I believe, boarding and whatnot, or you're going to have just these rules slowly added to the game state as you go through it that will constantly enhance what's there. So it kind of gives you enough information to play out the gate, but then it constantly adds more on top of that, so that by the time you dive into scenario, you are being given more rules. So overall, it is very accessible. Game time is going to vary based on scenario, but generally you're looking at 45 to 90 minutes, I would say, for most scenarios. And that brings us to what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking. As far as what I like, starting off the fact that there's a ton of tactical consideration as you play. And that starts off a little bit on the light side of that first scenario. That first scenario, I will warn you, just like many kind of tutorial scenarios, the first scenario is very much having your hand held. There's still stuff going on. You'll still wander around the board, try to figure out where to hide in various, asteroid fields and all that, and prototype, by the way. So everything I experienced as the first scenario might not be what you do in the final copy, but effectively you have a ton of, you have a small amount of tactical consideration in the first scenario, and for the most part it's kind of closing the distance, learning the systems at play, but then it starts adding more. And more is not just more rules, more is even just more ships, more variety in the things you can do, and the abilities you have, and how to choose which fleet's going to be better because you can close the distance and have that defensive fire, which activations you're going to be trying to taking and in what order. Do you want to try to get in that last activation with a small unit before it dies, or do you want to try to go ahead and try to take out their unit so they might be one activation shorter on their things? Because one thing we didn't talk about, but as you destroy various fleets and their commanders, players may have access to fewer card draws and fewer actions they can take a turn. So you're constantly trying to punch down the opponents and take them out and figure out what combination of harvesting, of ramming, of boarding, of every single thing going on in the game, what combination of all of it is going to work in your favor. It's just a ton of tactical things being thrown at you and ways to approach the puzzle as you constantly trying to be mindful of what your opponent's going to do because you don't know the cards in their hand. There's a general ease of play to the overall system while giving you enough things happening that the system is easy to understand and the game is easy to understand and the rules are easy to understand, but it gives you, and because of this, the fact that they give it to you one step at a time, it doesn't give you that front-loaded amount of information, so that's great as far as the slow introduction of rules, but it just gives you a lot of things to consider in a solid skirmish game with a lot of scenarios and campaigns that constantly challenge the way you're going to approach through the puzzle. As far as what I don't like in the game, I mentioned that I like the slow learning of the rules, and I do, but there is a caveat there, although the caveat is possibly related to just being a prototype. Which is, and possibly not, I don't know yet, we'll see. But one thing that I didn't love about the rules aspect is, first of all, there were a bunch of rules issues with what I had, prototype-wise, a bunch of things that didn't necessarily match, pictures that didn't match examples, or, sentences that were just cut off. There were a bunch of things that led to a slight degree of irritation that I don't think will be present in the final game, in the sense that I think the rules were very clearly outlined, but I think prototype-wise, I definitely had some issues to go through there. But I would say that one thing that I don't know how it's going to be handled is that I found that the slow introduction of rules was excellent, in terms of not front-loading you with too much information, but at times it was also confusing, especially because a lot of things you don't know if that's something you necessarily missed or if it's something that will be brought up later. And there's not like a single repository of all the keywords, all the information. A lot of things you kind of have to hunt through of where was the point where that was included. So I love the way the game doles out the information slowly, but I feel there possibly needs to be a better system of where it's all stored and handled for easy reference, as opposed to trying to figure out whether that was a rule from the beginning of the rule book or a rule that was given to you between scenario 3 and scenario 4, before. So again, the overall delivery of the rules I think is amazing. The way it's structured and referenceable I think needs to be improved, because I found a lot of frustration there trying to understand whether I missed something or whether it's coming up in a future scenario as I go through it. So both a system I like and a system I want to see refined before this becomes a final game. Additionally, some small other considerations. I didn't love moving around the ship with the very small units over here. These aren't the easiest to pick up, and then trying to kind of herd them around different areas. Smaller ships, and it's not, I think it's only really a big deal for me with these smaller ships. Everything else was easy to pick up and move. Maybe a small tray or any number of things could address that. It's small little irritation. And additionally, I'd say tracking fleets are not always the easiest. Tracking the fleet commanders, just seeing a bunch of numbers around the board, and the A and the E and the C and the F and all that, and trying to correspond it to the various commanders in play, having a good feel. The different types of ships in play were very easy, but sometimes when you have the same ship that references different models, having to understand that the A and the B fleets over here are really two different ships, and one has a commander on top of that. It's doable. It's not the hardest. The information's all present. You can look at it, but I wish it were a little bit more obvious at times. There are plenty of times in the game where I thought the fleet with the commander was one thing and it wasn't, and so that aspect of kind of corresponding the information to the board is the only other real complaint I'd say I have there. As far as I can see others not liking, first of all, this is a lot of dice rolling. There's a lot of dice rolling and a degree of the rich get richer as you destroy squadron after squadron. This is a game where you're going to be rolling handfuls of dice. There's lots of abilities and mitigation. There's ways to reroll your attacks. There's going to be evasive and ways to reroll things, and then mid-armor modifications. So a lot of things to manage there, which isn't necessarily the biggest, but just a lot of dice rolling and a single strong roll in the beginning of the game. If that player's attacking you and they go ahead and roll and they go ahead and they just get, this wasn't a good example because you're not going to have that, but if they roll like this and they go ahead and do that, and they also have rapid fire, so they re-roll over here, and they also get that 5, and boom, they hit you with 4 in that first attack. A single powerful roll in the beginning of the game can have a very strong effect because of the fact that it takes down your opponent's options, destroying some of their ship or crippling the strength over there. While over the course of the game, good and bad rolls for the most part will average out because of the nature of the fact that a squadron with 6 ships is going to have an easier time fighting against a squadron with 3 ships. Having a single strong roll early game can be impactful and can make a big difference in your opponent's ability to actually do back to you what they need to do. And so there is that aspect of luck that could be, if the luck gets front loaded, it can certainly be a problem. As far as final thoughts on Homeworld Fleet Command, overall, I very much enjoyed the game, although I'm not sure I'm prepared to give a rating on this yet, because I think my biggest complaints or my biggest irritations with the game possibly do have to do with the fact that it's a prototype. Overall, the general system at play, the sequence of missions you have, the tactical choice you have as you go through it, all those things are very engaging. Once you pick up the system, once you understand exactly what's going on, and as you add those rules, there's a lot to consider, a lot to think about as far as how you're going to activate and do everything in the game, and there's a lot of times where your opponent can just mess with you based on the cards they have, the interrupting you with an attack as you try to move past them, the slow aspect of trying to accomplish your objectives in the game while your opponent's trying to be mindful of how to stop you, because it's not always about killing your opponents. Very often, the stronger objectives in play, the ones that will give you more points, are more settled than simply taking out your opponent's ships. And so sure, who cares if I actually get, hit down again and again, if I can actually close the distance, get to your planet, and, harvest the minerals, if I can do my objectives, sometimes it's worthwhile. So there's a lot to consider as you go through it. Overall, I would say I very much enjoyed the tactical considerations and puzzle that this game gave me. At the same time, I had some definite irritations around different aspects, some of them related to prototype, and some of them possibly just related to, tracking things in different ways. I very much enjoyed this. I'd say it's probably somewhere between a 3.5 and a 4, but it still does fall into the out of 5, a 3.5 or a 4 out of 5, but because my main irritations were based on it being a prototype, I'm a little reluctant to hand out a final rating just yet. As far as other recommendations, first of all, if you're looking for something similar to this, that's a little bit accessible, a little bit possibly more accessible, while giving you the same aspect of, well, generally controlling things and trying to attack each other on the battlefield, any of the command and color systems, Memora 44 or Battle, what's the other, Commands and Colors, any of those will give you a similar degree of skirmish with accessibility mixed in. And if you're looking for something with space battles that gives you a bit more depth and complexity, Star Wars X-Wing is a game that, especially if you're looking for like the first edition stuff, should be easier to find as, lots of hop on eBay or Board Game Geek and find someone's old collection. You can dive into a ton of fleet skirmish battles with Star Wars X-Wing from Fantasy Flight Games. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.